amici. So it's really important before you dive into your lessons to kind of get organized. And so I wanted to show you my setup and invite you into my studio and just kind of show you how I set up my tubes of paint and all the different little pieces that come together so that whenever I'm ready to come in and paint, I don't have to be digging around trying to find things. Everything is up and ready to go. So if you can find a place in your house so that you can have something set up, it makes it so much easier to get in and paint. If you know that you have to get everything out and set everything up and then take it down and put it away, you're less likely to get in there and paint. So I want to start first of all with my lighting. So I am just in an extra bedroom in our house, and the lighting in here is not really great, okay? So I just have to make do, but I really recommend these OT lights because they give a nice daylight projection onto the canvas. So if I were to come over, I've got this one that's just a regular stand, and I'm not going to keep that light on for filming purposes right now. But it just gives a really nice bright light, and there's not really a glare, so it works out nicely. It's just kind of a cool daylight. The second thing that I want to encourage you to do is have your tubes of paint in the same order that you place them in your palette. Oh, is there an order to your palette? Well, there really should be. You don't want to just randomly be sticking paints out on your palette, trying to find those every time you go in to scoop up a glob of paint with your brush. So in your course preparation, there is a palette map, both for acrylics and for oils, that shows you how I set my palette up every single time. You can do it the same way that I do it, or if you have a way that you like to do it, that's fine too. But you want to make sure that you get in the habit of doing the same thing every time. So I place all of my transparent colors on the left and top row. So when I come in to paint, and I suggest that you do this as well for part one of each of the paintings that we do together, that you start off with only the transparent paints. And the reason for that is because the first layer that we lay out and put on our canvas, or our, in this case, ampersand gesso board, is all translucent paint blended with a little bit of the medium that I use. Okay, so the medium, now I just stick the medium in just a tiny little container because you don't need a huge amount of medium. The medium is not for mixing or cleaning your brush. It's only for dipping in the corner of the brush just to thin down those translucents so that they look more watercolory on that very first layer. So how do I mix up my medium? So what I do is I take Gamsol, which is my solvent, so I use 50% Gamsol, and I use 50% refined linseed oil. So both of these are by Gamblin. They are odorless, so it makes it for a much safer environment to work in. I'm not breathing in or smelling all of those nasty fumes. And what I will do is use a little funnel and put a mixture. I've got little marks here. And I put half solvent and half refined linseed oil. And so I'll just stick that funnel in there and then have plenty to work with. And so whenever I'm out, okay, I've got this handy, and then I can just pour a little bit into my little container. So, what do I use for my solvent? So this is just a Mona Lisa cleaning tank. And if you look down inside. I'm not going to pour it too far out because then we'll dump all of our solvent out, which would not be good. So in the bottom, there is what looks kind of like a concave chicken wire. And so that's really great for taking the brush and then getting all of that excess paint off of your brush so that we can keep that paintbrush clean. I have lots of paper towels that are always stacked up and ready to go, so that's another thing I do to prep ahead of time, is to have a good stack of paper towels. Got my brushes out. So that's the mixture of solvent. Okay, solvent is just the straight Gamsol by Gamblin. And then my medium again is the refined linseed oil and the Gamsol. And then for cleanup, it's really important to take care of your brushes. So I don't do this after every single painting, but every once in a while I'll stop and I will use lye soap or Murphy's oil soap. Okay, so these are really great cleaners. What I love about using this lye soap, and I'm just going to pull this out and show you. So you can see it's been used quite a bit, but it's a very nice waxy soap that gets out all of that terpenoid. So whenever you stick that up under the water and then take the brush and just gently run it through and then kind of pull that, keep that shape. You don't want to get those bristles all frayed. Then what that's going to do is get all of that excess gunk out of there. And at the end of the day, I'll lay those brushes flat so that that solvent and stuff doesn't run down into the ferrule of the brush. If you put it in a jar up like this, then that's going to loosen up the glue, which loosens up your bristles. So lay those flat to dry. And again, LYE lye soap is awesome to keep those brushes clean and in good shape. All right, let's get back to the paint tubes. So earlier I was saying it's important to have those tubes of paint lined up in the same order you line things up in your palette. All right, so you can see here, this is just a plastic container. I got this one, I believe, at Hobby Lobby in the craft section, the scrapbooking section, I think. They do have some in the art section as well, but I think they're a little bit smaller. This one was actually a really good size. And I just set those up, sap green, phthalo green, Caribbean blue, etc., in order that I put my paints. So when I run out of paint here, I know exactly where to go and grab to refill. It keeps me in the flow of painting so that I'm not constantly having to stop and dig through a drawer and find the paint that I ran out of. All right, moving on to palette cleanup. All right, so when your palette starts to get really dirty, your mixing area, it's important to keep that mixing area clean. So I have a couple of things that I use. I'll either use a flat palette knife and use that to actually scrape that middle mixing area out, and I will be demonstrating that during the lesson, so you'll actually see exactly how I go about doing that. Okay, another great tool to have is a paint scraper, and I just got this at a local hardware store. The one thing you do want to remember about the paint scraper is when you buy it, the blade is actually upside down for safety reasons. So you want to make sure that you pull that out, make sure it's blade side up, and then that way you've got a nice big knife for scraping out that mixing area and keeping that clean. So at the end of the day, of course it's important that you want to save those paints and keep those from drying out. So whether you're working in oils or acrylics, I love this Matterson Palette Box. So this is a 12 by 16, and I actually have put a piece of gray palette paper on the bottom. And then what I did was I took a 12 by 16 glass from a frame and I put tape around the outside. I would encourage using like a electrical tape, but just be really careful of those glass edges. You can also purchase a 12 by 16 glass palette that's already gray, already tinted, online. I've seen them at Amazon, Blick, I think Jerry's Artorama. But anyway, just do a search, a Google search, and you'll be able to find that. Those are so much easier to clean than a paper palette. But the other thing that I like about this Matterson palette is that it comes with a lid. Okay, so what I like to do is take just an old cotton, or just a cotton ball, and I use a little bit of clove oil, put a drop or two on the cotton ball, and I'll put it in the very middle of my palette. And then I can take this blue lid. Now, when I first started using this, which was years and years ago, probably 25 years ago, I couldn't figure out why the lid seemed to be a little bit bigger than the actual palette. And I realized the reason they do that is because once you put the lid on and then go through and seal off all of the edges, you can actually lift the corner and push down in the center and get rid of all of that excess air and then seal that corner back off. That'll help to push all of that oxidation out so it's not, or the air out so it's not oxidizing your paints and drying those out. So, great palette to have. All right, if you want to kind of preserve the bristles of your brush longer and give them a longer shelf life, then what I would suggest doing on occasion, maybe once a month or so, is just taking a little bit of just regular baby oil and putting a little bit of that oil on your bristles, laying those flat and letting those sit overnight. Now, you have to remember to make sure before you start painting that you clean that out really thoroughly, because that is a non-drying oil, and if you get that into your paints, then it's going to keep those paints from drying. So just put a little bit in there. That helps to keep those bristles from fraying out and keep the brush new longer, because I really like working with a nice chiseled brush. All right, so I am just going to show you how I go through each of my paintings, just to kind of prepare you ahead of time before you jump into that first lesson. So the first thing that we do, and this is the same process every time. Now keep in mind, I'm not actually going to paint a picture. We're just going to put some paint on the board just so you can see the process. But what I do is I dip those bristles into the medium. Okay, put a little bit of the medium out onto the palette. And then I'll start with my first transparent color. So I'm just going to pick one up. Let's just do some ultramarine blue. Okay, and I'm just blending ultramarine blue with the medium. And remember, that medium mixture is 50% refined linseed oil and 50% solvent. And then I'll put that first layer on in a very translucent way, and you can see that that did not have enough medium. So this is something that you're going to have to play with in order to get just the right amount of medium, so that it's not too much where it's dripping and it's not dry to where it drags. Okay, so you want to just get those colors. Let's just pick up another color, Caribbean blue with medium. And we'll just come right in next to that. And what we do is we get that first layer of transparent paints onto the surface before we start in with the opaque colors. So that's why I only put those transparents out first, so that you don't accidentally come in and pick up those opaque colors. Okay, that's just in the beginning. Once we start that second layer, then all the colors are out. Every time I put all the colors out, just in case I, want to use something I didn't expect to use. It's already there, and I don't have to go digging for it. Okay, so you'll just cover whatever the object shape is that we're doing. I'll just pick up a little bit of phthalo green. Still using the transparent color, and I do move that brush in all different directions. And notice if I use more medium, then that color is going to be less pigmented and it's going to go lighter. If I use more pigment or more paint, you can see that it goes darker. So that's just with that phthalo green, the difference between the light and the dark, just by changing the amount of medium. All right, so once that layer is on and I cover the whole board with the transparent layer, then we'll come in with those opaque colors. So notice that I didn't use the solvent and clean the brush out while we were doing these colors because they're very similar and they're not going to get muddy. But now we're going to come in and we're going to put some opaque color on top. So I am rinsing. Notice that I wiped the brush with the paper towel first, rinse, wipe with the paper towel, and I'm pulling those bristles to get a nice chiseled edge. Then I'll come in with those opaque colors. So let's just pick up, let's just go with a straight cadmium yellow. And I'm loading up quite a bit of paint onto the brush. And then we start building, and you can see that if I press in and allow those colors to blend, you get some nice nuances. If we go a little thicker and I allow some of that color to offload, you can see the yellow will sit up on top. But there's also little bits of blue peeking through. So that's really what gives this such a vibrant look to it, such a vibrancy. Let's just pick up another color here. I'm going to go ahead and rinse that yellow out of the brush. So I rinse, I take the excess and wipe it on the lid, pull that extra color out with a paper towel, just pulling that all the way through. And let's just go in with the ice blue. Actually, let's mix in a little bit of Caribbean blue with the ice blue. Scooping that up, coming in and then placing that color on top. Let's go a little lighter. Just adding more ice blue into the mix. And I would really encourage you to take a practice board and just practice your brush strokes. See how many different strokes you can get. And you can do that with just the transparent color, or you can come over the top of the transparent color and try it with those opaques as well. But I think if you start practicing and really kind of putting conscious thought into how you're placing those strokes, that is going to make it a much, it's just going to make it easier for you to see that you can take this one brush, which is a bright 28 Royal Sable Tech, and you can make so many different types of marks with it and make your painting have lots of variety and give it much more interest. So I can take the corner of the brush, I can do little bitty marks, or we can use the width of the brush, and you can see that's fairly dry. You see how that drags across? Sometimes that can give it an interesting stroke. I'm going to add in a little more medium this time. Okay, or you can take the brush and you can turn it and you can get nice thin lines. You see all the different little strokes and marks that you can make. So I would just encourage you to play around with it until you can get used to using this type of brush. So again, hopefully this helps you with your setup. Make sure you're prepared ahead of time, get yourself organized, look at your supply list and see what supplies you need, and then specifics for each lesson. It will tell you the size surface that we're using and the brushes. Basically, I think I just used 2 different brushes throughout the whole course. So it's just the 14 Bright and the 28 Bright in the Royal Sable Tech brand. And get your area set up. Make sure that you have gloves so that if you get paint all over yourself, you don't want those cadmiums getting down into your skin. Got your palette box already set up. You've got your solvent with your jar and your medium. And cleaning, you've got those, that lye soap or Murphy's oil soap. You can even use Dawn, just regular Dawn. It cuts grease, so that helps to clean out all of the excess oils in your brush. Make sure you've got good lighting and try to keep things set up so that it makes it easier for you to come in and paint.